Welcome to the Addiction Solution Podcast. I'm Michelle Dunbar. Enjoy listening and watching as addiction experts Mark Sheeran and I cover controversial as well as helpful topics on addiction, how to move past it, and other related subjects. As two of the co-founders of the Freedom Model, Mark and I will give you a completely new perspective on the topics that matter to you. We will take to task the Recovery Society's lies and misinformation and replace them with facts, research, and the methods to move on from addiction struggles without 12-step meetings, rehabs, and the shackles of endless recovery. Let's escape the treatment and recovery trap together and learn to be free. Welcome to the truth. It's time for you and those you love to step off the addiction roller coaster for good and learn a solution that works. It's called Move Past Addiction Masterclass, and it's a free 1-hour live online class where you'll hear new and empowering information about how to solve addiction for good without steps, meetings, rehabs, or being labeled for life. If you're struggling or you love someone who is, then this masterclass is for you. To enroll in this free 1-hour class, click the link provided or go to thefreedommodel.org and choose the date and time that works for you. See you at the masterclass. Hey everyone, welcome to the Addiction Solution. I'm Michelle Dunbar.
And I'm Mark Sheeran, and we are the co-authors of The Freedom Model for Addictions, Escape the Treatment and Recovery Trap, this book, and Freedom Model for the Family, and our other co-author is Stephen Slate.
Yes, it is our 200th episode, so we have a special little topic to cover today, and that is we're going to talk all about the history of the Freedom Model, how this all began, how we met, and started this whole process. Now I know we've talked about it. We talked about it a little bit in our master class, and we've talked about it bits and pieces in other podcasts, but I don't think we've ever gone through like a full kind of anthology.
Yeah, so we're going to kind of do a timeline. I didn't write it down because it's all in my head, but and we're going to tell some stories along the way, and some of this, if you guys, there are people that literally binge watch our stuff, and you've heard a lot of these pieces in different places, but we're going to bring in some new historical facts, and so obviously Michelle and I both come from AA families, and you all know that. And we grew up from our first memories, basically. I did. I think hers might be a little bit later when her dad got sober later. But my mother had already been in AA when I was born. I think I was like 1 year old when she got started.
Right.
Ironically, she drank through 12 pregnancies, and we all kind of turned out all right, just pounding the beers.
Not that we'd recommend that.
No,
right?
No. It just sort of strange fact. Yeah, grew up in that, and I had just an odd upbringing. My mother basically got involved in AA and then had an affair in AA and then left the family when I was 7 and moved on with her life. And that was my first foray into watching what treatment does to families, how it splits you apart. Yeah. And being the youngest of 12 kids and a bunch of step brothers and sisters, I got to watch as treatment and therapies, quote unquote, treatment and therapies destroyed life. And they do that by dividing and conquering, because there's a hierarchy of power involved in those models. And even with therapists, my mom saw this therapist, Bob, and she would always say, "Do you want to see Bob?" And I'm like, "Fuck no, I don't want to see that dude." I basically destroyed my family. Thank you. No.
Was Bob in AA?
No, but I swear to God, he was so invested in my mother.
Oh, he was in love with your mother.
I don't know. I never met the dude. I didn't want to. She was constantly bugging me to see him because I was a disturbed kid. She'd get me on the weekends, and I had all kinds of problems. But
His mother was super charming. She was charming.
yeah, she was cool, but she wasn't very cool to us kids.
No. Well, same
Uh,
with, same with my dad.
Yeah. So
Super charismatic
so-
people.
so that's the background of my family. I mean, I don't want to, everybody's heard my story, so I don't want to belabor it. Eventually I drank and drugged. Obviously I did that with a tremendous amount of guilt because I was taught that I'd be an alcoholic. The whole narrative existed in my life that you're an alcoholic, it's genetic. And my mother was so screwed up from this that our whole existence was about her guilt of leaving the family, and I couldn't stand being around her after a while. I know that sounds really harsh, but when a mother leaves, feels guilty about leaving, and then imposes her tears and guilt on a child constantly, and that's the topic that gets brought up in every conversation. After a while, you learn to hate your mother because it's a type of emotional stealing, because as a kid, you want your mom just to be secure and happy. And
well, that's kind of a little bit too of a little bit of a product of AA because the whole amends process is predicated on wanting to get something from it, right? You want to get approval from everybody. See, I was a drunk and I didn't do good things, but I needed to get my life together. So you need to all understand that this is what I needed to do for me.
Yeah.
And you need to all accept that. Now I'm making amends to you, but it's so superficial and it's not done for the right reasons.
Yeah. So her life was horribly not fulfilling for her.
Yeah.
So there was this constant melees of depression, and there was an anger too. My mother, it got to a point where it was pretty obvious that she didn't want children. And, I don't know what it was like for my older brothers and sisters because they were so much older than us, that what we called the little four, right? The
youngest.
Yeah. And there was a kind of a gap. And then the first 8, I think they had a completely different upbringing than we did. Ours was in a broken home. The first 8 didn't have that. So, I think they have a very different view, but my mother was broken by this point. I mean, she was just not a kind woman to us, and she was totally disinterested in us. But the reason I tell this is because Michelle has a similar experience. It's different, but it's similar, but it sets the stage for the freedom model because I learned how to feel guilty and feel like I was the cause of my mother's unhappiness constantly. And that makes you ripe for AA. This whole idea that I'm not enough, that I'm spiritually not fit, that I need to give until it hurts if I want to get sober.
Yep.
I mean, it set the stage for this total inferiority complex, this feeling that I don't belong anywhere else. Other kids are playing baseball. I'm going to rehabs. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was just so fucking bizarre. My whole upbringing was because I was in a cult. My family was immersed in a cult just because of this influence constantly in our life. And it made for a really confusing upbringing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I'm going to preface this because this is very popular on social media now. We're Gen X kids. Okay. So, and we're older Gen X. I was born in 68. He was born in 70. So we were raised in the 70s and 80s. And both his mom and my dad went to AA in the 70s when AA was exploding.
Yeah.
Like
the whole self-help movement was
it was huge. You come out of the 60s where everybody was partying and having a great time. And then they all kind of, as they were kind of aging out of it, AA was kind of taking hold, and they all, I think a lot of them ended up there.
Yeah.
Thinking that's what they needed.
Yeah.
And so for me, I was 9 years old when, and you've all heard that, when my father went from being this honest to God, he was super charming and charismatic and fun. He was a party guy.
Yeah, he loved parties.
He loved parties right up until recently.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, he did.
And he was very social. He was involved in local politics. People loved him. And so, like, but we had, I mean, there was problems. I'm not going to lie. There was problems. And I mistakenly thought the problems, because retrospect, right? So we were kind of told the problems were because he was a drinker. Like the fact that he would have temper tantrums and be abusive and violent at times, what was always seemed to be tied to the fact that he was a heavy substance user. But you know what happened? He went to AA, he quit drinking, he became a guru in short order, and the violence and the temper tantrums didn't stop.
Yeah, it didn't. And Jerry was always, he's brilliant, but he's also was difficult to work with.
Yeah, troubled.
Because troubled that way. And so that gets us to the next stage. So Michelle and I both end up in AA. We don't have to go through the drunk log. You've all heard it.
Yeah, you've all heard our antics.
Yeah, we drank and drugged for all through our teens, and we're all screwed up.
But I do want to say one thing though before that. There was some things that happened, and I talk about this in the masterclass. So if you've been to the masterclass, you can plug your ears, I suppose. But there was a couple things that happened that made my dad seriously question 12-step program, seriously question AA and what he had been doing. Up until the point he started to question it, I think he genuinely gave AA credit for the fact that he quit drinking.
Yeah.
And now he became a guru. We ended up moving away. When we came back, he was kind of dabbling with AA meetings, but he had gotten on with his life for the most part. But he still, like a lot of people do, even that leave AA and don't go to meetings, he still gave AA credit for the fact that he wasn't drinking anymore, even though he wasn't going all the time. But here's a couple things that happened. My grandfather, who had been in and out of treatment programs, VA hospitals, in and out of AA. He had put at one point 3 or 4 years sober together when he lived with us, because that was a condition of him living with us. And then when we moved away, he went back to drinking, and he died in 1986 in withdrawal from alcohol by himself, because the family, everybody had implemented tough love. Right. And so he was all alone. He believed he would die an alcoholic, and that's exactly what happened to him.
Mm-hmm.
He died from alcohol. He had no other health issues other than the heavy drinking. And so that happened. That kind of rocked my dad's world a bit. And especially the way that he died, it was truly sad and tragic. And my grandfather was an amazing, kind, wonderful man. He was not a violent drunk, nothing like that. He was just sad. He was just, he was somewhat broken from being in France in World War II. He had legitimate emotional problems. But so that happened. And then my mother left my father and left him with prejudice. She was like, I don't want anything from you. I'm done, and left the marriage. And those two things, I think, shook my dad's world enough to make him realize, maybe AA doesn't work.
Yeah.
Maybe there's something seriously wrong with it.
Right. And that's when I met him. And then I met Michelle a couple months later. And I had gone to treatment and all that. Now, so I want to jump to, I've met Jer. And what changed me was he used the word normal, that I was a normal kid. I was 19 years old at the time, and I looked like I was 12. I looked very young. And, but I had experienced a lot of things in life that a lot of children don't experience. I'd been to third world countries. I had traveled quite a bit. I had lived on my own since I was 7 years old without parents, in a different building than my father. So I was pretty worldly for a young guy, and I'd been to college, and I had worked in different states, just all this kind of wild life. And so I kind of got, once I was told that I was just this normal screwed up kid, right? But I was normal, and that the disease idea really didn't fit. And I don't think certainly Jerry didn't articulate any of that to me, but he was figuring it out for a couple of years, like Michelle said, basically from his father's death in 86. So this was 89. And in that 3 years, he had figured out that powerlessness was bullshit, that the term alcoholism was nonsense, that addiction really didn't exist, that anybody could moderate. He had that all in the background, but he didn't talk about it publicly, except for nobody's powerless, and they moved past this problem. And he kept saying that, and he was going to AA and saying that. And so I hooked up with him and became his research assistant, and it just made sense. We were partners in business, and not in a relationship or anything like that, just partners in business. And I was his research assistant. He was my mentor, my business mentor, and it worked. I mean, we were figuring things out at a rapid pace. Michelle came on board for a period of, I don't know.
Well, it was kind of funny because, well, I Dad did do when Mark moved in, moved, like my dad had this big house by himself because my mother had left.
Right. And I was homeless at
and
the time.
he was homeless. And so my dad, I didn't know this at the time, but he had gone back to meetings to do research. And that's when he met Mark, and he met some other people, young, and specifically dudes, because men stay with the men, work with the men, and women work with the women in AA, right? That's the way it's supposed to be.
Eventually the women came, but you were the first.
But no, it was just, but nobody, the women didn't live there with you.
Right.
Guys.
Yeah.
So he allowed, some dudes to come and stay at the big house with him, and they helped him take care of the grounds and the house.
Yeah,
and
it was
stuff.
like a boarding house.
Yeah, it was like a boarding house. One of them was also my husband, which is how I met him.
Yeah.
But Mark was the only one there at the time, and so I have to tell this story. So my sister and I go there, and I'm still drinking, still partying, and I wouldn't even call it partying anymore. I was mostly drinking by myself. But I was working, and I had failed out of college. And so I was living with my mom, and my sister and I went to my dad's to get our Christmas present. We have a Christmas present. Every year he'd give us some money, and I wanted to go get my money. And so Kristen and I went there. Kristen's my sister. And they kind of like, and I think you were like somewhere in the house at the time. I don't know if you heard this exchange, but they kind of did an intervention with me. I've talked about this before, where all of a sudden I'm ambushed, and my sister they start talking to me about my heavy substance use. My sister had spent some time, couple weekends with me at college, when I was at college. And so she's telling him the most embarrassing stuff. All about my promiscuity, and about the way I'm behaving, and how heavily I'm drinking, and the fact I think she's even using a lot of drugs. It was all, and I instantly, what does that do? That puts you on such a defensive. I'm horribly humiliated. And so I just told everybody to fuck off, and I left, and I had brought my sister there. So I don't know how she got home that day, but I did not bring her back to my mother's house. I went, and where did I go? I probably went to the bar, and I probably got drunk. And I was, from that point forward, for the next 6 months, I did nothing but drink and drink and drink, morning till night, morning till night, morning till night. I was like, okay, all right, if I'm an alcoholic, I'm going to be an alcoholic. I'm going to do this, like, for real. And so I'm not a huge fan of interventions because of this, because I had two people that I trusted and loved, and it felt like they attacked me unprovoked. And it was just horrendous. But anyway, I had to tell that story. So that started kind of my progression into the depths. And then I kind of came out on the other side, quit drinking on my own, and then went to my father to ask what I should do.
Right. So that was that summer. And then by that point, there was a whole crew of us from AA, because Jer and I would go to meetings and say things like, you could get well, and you're not powerless.
Well, you're not an alcoholic.
Yeah. And people were attracted to that. And AA at that time did not like that. And they came after us, and said really horrible things about us, but it didn't seem to matter because people's positive drive, they want solutions. So we had something. We had a seed that ended up being very popular and very empowering to people, and that was that they're not fucked for life, right? And so this whole recovery thing, and your dad was really cool because we would skip meetings, which was a taboo, and we would go to concerts, and all the guys would do things, and
Yeah, we built like a social network for real. And
yeah, not wrapped around the whole apparatus of AA, but still integrated into it,
yeah,
but kind of counterculture. And we became known as the Young Guns.
yeah.
And then we started our own meetings and did that whole thing. Then it became very popular. It blew up into 38 men and women, and in and out of the Baldwin House. We called it the Baldwin House, which is where the name Baldwin Research came from.
Yeah, it was on Baldwin Road. That was the house I was a teenager in.
Yep. So it's that house was basically almost like a flop house, because Jer said there will be no rules. We're just going to observe people. We're going to give them one message that they can move on with their lives, and we will observe. And it was a fucking madhouse. But very positive things happened there. And
well, look at if
people changed.
What happened was, and you can see this research. The Baldwin Research Project of 1990 is available on baldwinresearch.com, where he studied, I think it was like 39 people total.
38.
And he followed us for a whole year. We didn't know it was an observational study, and we really didn't know what was going on. And one group of people, and we were all under the age of 30 years old, because that demographic that goes to AA does the worst. Like the absolute worst. If you look at people under the age of 30 years old that get exposed to AA, the data is abysmal. Okay. They have
it's really
much higher rates of overdose and death. They have much higher rates of mental health issues. They have the tenure of their substance use problems is longer. I mean, planting a seed in someone who's 18 years old that they're forever diseased and powerless is a disaster. Okay. There's absolutely no data that supports it's a good thing. So what happened was he had these two groups that he was studying, and one group got the message from him: you're not diseased, you're not powerless, you can be okay. You can actually solve this problem and get on with your life, right? The other group got the traditional message that you're powerless, you're diseased, you're going to have to come to these meetings forever. You're always going to struggle. And so the results were remarkable, right? The group that I was in, thank God, that got the message, and Mark was in, that we could be okay. What was in it? Like 75% were still abstinent at the end of 1 year. I mean, 75%.
Yeah, it was crazy high.
And then the other group, 0.
Yeah.
The end of the 1 year, 0 were still abstinent.
Yeah, it was bad. It was really bad.
Yeah. So just that one message, that's how the Freedom Model started.
And what's crazy about it is it was a confused message. And I'll tell you why. We were confused because when I met Jer, he was on this kick of really moving away from AA. But the only place he could find study subjects is within AA. So he would go to AA. He wouldn't recruit. He would simply say, hey, did you know you can get past this? All this other shit is nonsense. Mm-hmm. And then that would attract people. And a lot of them were transient like me, homeless, and that kind of thing. And then they would move into the Baldwin House with all kinds of different motives, right? Some for 3 hots and a cot. But regardless, we talked about this constantly. But then the research switched around because we all came out of AA. So we were trying to negotiate. If you read the Baldwin Research Project in 1990, which is in baldwinresearch.com on that website, it's an old report. If you look at that, we kind of went a little bit backwards because we were saying, wait a minute, I think that's what Bill Wilson was trying to say back in the early 30s or in the mid 30s. Bill wasn't saying that. We were interjecting our own ideas into Bill Wilson. So the next 2 years was me figuring out, holy shit, Bill was crazy. And we've kind of been developing our own model without realizing it, mixed with AA, because we're going to AA. And so it was this wicked, confused time.
Oh God, it was.
It was, on the one hand, we're saying you can move past this, but on the other hand,
we're still going to meetings.
and
We're
in the
we're
apparatus.
saying that service work is important, that
Yes.
surrender is important.
Oh yeah.
Like there was things we were like, do we still need this? Do we still need this? And so if you read our research on baldwinresearch.com, there's a whole anthology of everything.
Yeah, it's a 74-page anthology. It's the last thing Jer wrote before he retired.
Yeah. And you'll see that how the more that we studied, and not just studied and read other people's work, but the more that we observed the people we were helping and tested out our theories, the more we learned and the further away from the original AA message we got.
And the closer we got to the very beginning, where Jer was just coming up with his own ideas about empowerment. It was really weird. It was a 12-year span, what Michelle's talking about. So it starts with Jer leaving AA, getting his shit together, this little pocket of time that Michelle described where he left AA. And then when Marilyn left and when his father died and all this, he starts getting back integrated into AA because that's what you did. And he had decided, well, that's where I'm going to study people.
Yes.
Now because where else are you going to find drunks, right? To deal with? Well, you could find them anywhere. He could have done something different, but we didn't know that at the time. I was basically I think the second or third person. There was 2 other people ahead of me that came to the house. And then I was the first one to move in. Once that happened, Jer kind of reintegrated back into AA.
Yes.
And from that point, that was 1990.
Yep.
All the way till about 2001, 2002 and this is where was a walking out of AA. But what I want to say is this is where we did something that nobody in the world has ever done.
That's right. And
that is, I put my life on hold. Jer put his life on hold. Michelle didn't put her life on hold, but did basically also put her life on hold. And her kids had to practically live at the retreat and stuff. I mean, it was so crazy, but our careers as researchers really blew up because we spent every single day living either at the Baldwin House. Then there was an apartment called Washout Road where we wrote our first reports, a little span of time, about a year, where me and Jer were basically homeless and penniless. And then
they had my car. I gave them my car to drive.
That's right. And then
I walked to work.
And then we started the first retreat in Hageman.
Yeah.
Which I go by every day now.
Yeah.
On my way back from work. And why don't you tell a little bit about walking into the retreat?
Well, it's kind of funny because
so this is 1992.
So 1991. Wasn't it 90?
No, it was 92, February 92.
February 92.
I incorporated Baldwin Research Incorporated, the not-for-profit, got the not-for-profit status.
Oh, that's right.
That February.
That's right.
And then a week later, we moved into Hageman.
Oh my gosh. So they were so excited. They had found this house in Hageman, and it was an old retirement home. Like it was like a nursing home. It had been a nursing home, but it had closed when the regulations changed. And so it closed like 10 years earlier. So it was this dilapidated old house in Hageman, New York. It was, and the Hagemans had built it. So it was the original house in this little town.
It's called the Pauling Mansion.
Yes. Yeah. And it was, it was creepy. It was absolutely
big
creepy.
Victorian, beat up old Victorian.
It was. And so the moment you walk in, I don't know if you believe in these things, but the moment you walk in, it had a weird vibe to it. It just a strange vibe. But the main room that you walk into from the side had these cherry wood walls, right?
Yeah.
It was very majestic. It had a big fireplace. It had a couple different libraries. It was a really beautiful structure. Like
it still is.
Yeah. And but it was dilapidated. And there was, when you went upstairs, there was holes in the roof.
Mm-hmm.
And it was February, so it was cold. And they're like moving in to this place. And I'm thinking, you're going to freeze to death. And B, this place is creepy and haunted. I mean, there was a closet that was filled with bat droppings. Like, do you remember? Like,
Yes,
obviously, because he had to clean it out.
Yeah.
I mean, they just had, and my father at the time was just a little younger than we are now. So he was in his late 40s.
Yeah, he's 50.
Oh, he's just
turned 50.
turning 50 in
Right.
92. He's just turning 50. And I think about that now and how much energy he needed to have to move into this and say, we're going to change the world starting here.
Well, what was funny was I don't think he saw that when we first went through, he made me make the decision. He said, "Do you want to do this?" Because I think years
What
later.
movies were there?
Oh yeah, yeah. So I'll
sorry.
tell you. No, that's good. So you have to understand, we were bankrupt.
Yeah,
we
didn't have any money.
We had no. Jer had
he had a retirement from GE,
but he had a reputation and a background in research. I had nothing. I was just 20, and at that point 21, 22 years old, and so it was insane. I mean, the whole thing was completely nuts. And I remember he asked me, do you want to do this? Is this the house? And I said, yeah. And it looked like every halfway house I had ever been in.
It did.
So what was ironic was I was recreating my past. I was comfortable in this place. I was comfortable because I lived totally transient since I was a child. I grew up basically in a drug house, with no parents. And so for me, the answer was yeah. And I remember him later telling me, holy shit, man, we got a lot of work to do. I can't believe you picked this, but I guess beggars couldn't be choosers because you
got a good deal on it. It seemed
we had 8 months for free.
Yeah.
Jerry it was crazy how it all happened, but 8 months for free. And then they would pack up the lease payments at the end of 8 months. And we were allowed to change anything we wanted to change. The owners were totally willing to work with us in one conversation. And so we moved in that night. We literally talked to the lady. She was out in front of Jerry had this business plan that he had whipped off. He handed it to her. We didn't even know where the place was. We just drove up, handed it this lady this thing, and she said yes. And that night we packed our shit at Washout Road and we're in.
Oh my God.
I mean, it was totally insane.
That
totally
is insane.
And then the walk out of AA began. And that's a whole different thing, but I've been.
You have to talk about the movies.
Oh, so the very first night, I didn't know what to do. Right.
It's not like they had. I mean, like this is the early '90s, so no internet. They had no cell phones, no cable. They really didn't have any contact with the outside world.
In this dank, dark house, I basically had no friends but Jer, and then I said. Well, and they left, the previous owners left a TV, a VCR, and 2 movies. And the movies were Field of Dreams, Build It and They Will Come, and The Money Pit.
And The Money Pit.
And the house ended up being The Money Pit.
But
and
it also...
I watched those 2 movies because I was bored. And then I got up and I said, huh. And I started taking all the safety railings off. And Jared comes downstairs. He's kind of working on things, getting an office ready. He goes, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm going to start. It's the Money Pit. We're going to
start renovating.
And he's like, huh, I'm impressed. And then he went back upstairs and I took all the railings off. I had a pile of railings out in the front yard and, all the safety rails and stuff for the elderly. And that's how it started. And then the next 10 years was us walking out of AA.
And rebuilding that house.
And building the Freedom Model. Yeah, we helped.
They just started taking, like people came to them. There was no advertising. It was like they would go out, you stop what you're doing every day and you go to a meeting, not like to find people as much to just spread the word that, did you know you could be okay?
Yeah. So we were conflicted because there was all this old folklore AA historical stuff that we were reading and studying deeply.
Yeah.
And, going to the archives in New York and doing all these road trips and interviewing people and contacting the people in Hawaii that were founders and going to the McPike Farm, which is where Ebby Thatcher was. And, Bill Wilson's, we did all this. We drove all over the Northeast, and this was over a period of years. And what we found is that we were following ideas that Bill Wilson had come up with that were complete fabrications.
Yes.
And I was wondering why it was so difficult and why it was such a failure half the time. And so I started letting my instincts take over, and I was like, this is fucking bullshit. All of this, just, once I started to learn that it was nonsense and that it was a cult, but I really didn't fully get it yet, and then you came back in the middle of that.
Yeah. Well, I was kind of, I was always there to help the women. That was what I like.
Yeah, we needed that.
Yeah. Now, I had been kind of a heretic in the group because Bob and I hooked up. And back, back in the day in AA, I was only in AA like a couple months honestly, weeks when Bob and I hooked up. And so that was bad. I was shunned for a period of time. But I was always around. I was always kind of hanging around, and I was always helping the women, and while trying to build my career on my own and finish school. And but I was always drawn to helping people, not because I believed that I needed to do that. That was kind of even through all this, as we've been learning, there was a little bit of a strange dichotomy, because I knew I don't need to be here to be okay. And as a matter of fact, being around all of this was a hell of a lot more stressful than just moving on with my life.
Yeah.
And so, because a lot of people will say that to us now, they'll be like, why do you keep doing what you're doing if you don't need to do it? Well, because we know things that other people don't.
Yeah, we were figuring it out.
We've done things other people haven't. And so, I came back in, and right when they opened the retreat, and I can remember you or Dad, maybe Dad called me when the first woman came to the retreat.
Yep.
And I think Dad called me, and he was like, we've got this woman coming in tonight. We need you to come to the retreat.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, okay. And at the time, I think I still lived 30 miles away, which was fine. And so, I remember driving to the retreat that night and hanging out for a really long time. And then I was kind of just back in there every night again, you know, and it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was definitely an adventure, because we were really doing something that nobody had ever done before.
Yeah.
And we were so mixed up, but it was about, so we were in that sort of mixed up, messy,
in the middle.
Yeah, in the middle, until about 95, 96, I met my wife. We became friends for about 4 years. We're still Jeremy, Michelle, and there were others at this point. There were
a lot of other people that were part of this.
Yeah, and a lot of stories. And Jer actually adopted some people that basically their parents would drop them off, young people.
Yeah, young.
And then just not pick them up again. So Jer actually made them Browns, right?
Yep, part of the family.
Yeah. Yeah. So that happened.
Which was weird, but it wasn't weird to a certain extent to me, because growing up in the cult of AA, there was a lot of weirdness like that. So it didn't feel, for both Mark and I, it didn't feel like it was weird.
Right. I had transient people in and out of our house all the time.
All the time.
So there was a lot of that flavoring, but you have to understand, we were really good at showing people that they could move on.
Yes. We didn't want them to stay forever.
Yeah. And now there were times where our research we would lose our way, and we would say this statistic works. And then we would find out later, no, it didn't quite. And time would bear all that out. The other thing that bared out the truth, and that is what the freedom model is, right? That you're free to move on with your life, and that addiction doesn't exist. It's a construct, and compelled use doesn't exist. All these things that we can say with certainty now, none of that was certain to us. No, it was all new ideas and being counteracted by angry AA people. Meanwhile, there was the state came after us to try and shut us down. I was in a lawsuit with them for years and years and years. The local government came after us in 2 separate lawsuits. The police would stop us and harass us for 10 years. That went on.
Yep.
Just constant pressure to be run out of town. And luckily, I grew up in conflict and none of it totally freaked me out. I was like, basically, fuck you. I'm going to do what I want to do because I'm helping people.
Yeah.
And I think that when the state and everybody figured out, wow, these people, there's nothing nefarious going on.
No,
they're doing something really remarkable. And everybody kind of backed off and became.
Well, you know what happened
advocates.
to in that little town. The little town didn't want us, and they were afraid. And one of the things that Mark did so well, my father, not so much. My father liked to fight, and he was looking for a fight most of the time. But Mark wasn't. And wherever this came from, I mean, part of this was my dad too. We wanted to leave the town better than we found it.
Yeah.
And that was always our goal. And that little town was the place to get heroin in our little community. That was known as the place to get drugs.
Literally next door. I had
a
a
retreat.
A drug house. And I was like, fuck, do I really have to deal with this? But
And that was the irony of it, is they didn't want us there.
Yeah.
Yet right next door was a well-known drug dealer. So who clearly had a little bit of protection going on. Well, that we ended up getting that house at auction and tearing it down. And so that little town doesn't have that problem anymore.
Yeah. We cleaned up the town and it was rough, man. There were a couple of times we had fights out in the street.
Yeah.
A lot of cop cars. A cop car went in the river downtown. I mean,
it was good. There was, oh my God.
If there was
this needs to be a Netflix series. I'm just saying, if anybody's interested, we can do a Netflix
I have all
series.
the newspaper clippings. Literally at one point there was like 8 of us out in the street fighting the locals.
Oh my gosh.
Duking it out. It was totally insane.
It was insane.
But to me, it wasn't any different than what I was doing growing up, except for and Jerry too. I couldn't have done it without Jerry and Michelle. I couldn't have. I care about people. I didn't want people to go to rehab and come out and put a gun in their mouth like I did. I didn't want people to feel hopeless that they were going to be in recovery the rest of their lives and struggle horribly and be deprived and feel deprived of what they wanted and all that horrible stuff that AA tells you you're going to have to live like, this sort of subculture of failure and doomsaying. And I knew that wasn't real. Somehow I intuitively knew that. And so did Jer. And then there were other people, like I said, that joined in, met my wife. But you were going to say something.
I wanted to say something to the people that were with us in the early years. And I mean, Mark and I were kind of the sponsors. Like we sponsored a ton of people, him, men, me, women, and
hundreds.
And our hearts were always in the right place. We didn't always get it right. We often didn't get it right. But one of the things that was, because our hearts were in the right place and because we were always open to learning.
Your dad instilled research.
He did. Let's look at the data. And so I want to apologize, first of all, to anybody in those early years that maybe, we were stuck where we see a lot of people in our group stuck, right? In between those two worlds of, the recovery world, which is designed to keep you fearful and there. Okay. That's what it's designed to do. And then this other world out here that's like, no, you're okay and you can be free. And so we were stuck in the middle there for, a decade easily. Maybe a little bit longer for me because I was a little bit slower, a little bit more fearful. And so I just want to say, the people in the early years, thank you, because without you, none of this would be here.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think you can do anything with social change to the degree that AA is such a deep, abiding cult,
Yes.
and have it be a smooth process, because you're shattering ideas that are so religious in nature.
Yeah.
And my God, is it hard to deal with. So we got to the end of that first 12 years, and I got married. Ryan showed up.
Yep.
You all know Ryan. He's the sort of Oz behind the curtain.
And Steven. And then
then
Steven
Steven
showed
showed
up
up.
shortly after Ryan.
Yep. Actually, Ryan's first day here was at my wedding. I got married,
I
and
remember.
and I didn't have any staff on duty, so I brought the retreat to my wedding.
Yes, he did. Like the guests came
Yeah.
to his wedding.
Yeah, because I didn't have any.
But it was
place
such
for
an
them.
entrenched part of our lives.
Yeah.
That it was okay. Like you lived with these people. So
Yeah. So at that point, we lived in the apartment next door. We had bought a bunch of apartments, and we were doing continuing education. We were figuring out those parts. Michelle ran that. Then the family program developed, and then we got rid of the meeting structure. We had meetings. We were in AA. Then we created the Young Guns. Then we created Old Fashioned AA, which was really a mistake. And then it morphed into what we called the Fellowship, which was like our own little cult thing going on.
Yeah.
And that's where at the end of right around 2000, we nixed every
2002. I'm going to tell you what happened. Exactly. This is, I came to actually work full-time for the company in 2002 and actually work there in August. I was a volunteer all that time. And then because I had been a stay-at-home mom for a little while, and then I decided I would work there. And once my son was going to school, my youngest son. And so I'd been working there from like the summer of 2002, and we had the Fellowship was done by then. We had people that would stay on as we had a volunteer program. So they'd come to the retreat, and then we had all these other buildings that we owned right in the little town of Hegeman, little village, and they had renovated them and made them apartments. So people were living there, going to meetings at night together at the retreat. And then it was Christmas Eve.
Yep.
It was Christmas Eve, 2002. And my father had done a white paper that showed that the people that had come to the retreat and left and gone home and got on with their lives did twice as good as the people that stuck around and stayed in the bubble.
Right. The fear bubble. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
we were engendering fear. We were creating a problem.
Like somehow people needed to stay for support. Right.
Yeah. Oh.
And it was tragic. It was tragic that people felt they needed that. And my father wrote that paper, and he said, you're going to announce at this meeting. I don't think it was Christmas Eve. I think it was right before Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve. It was
It was Christmas Eve.
It was Christmas Eve.
It was Christmas Eve. It was that day.
Yeah. So we all went to the meeting that night, and we announced that this is done.
But
go home.
But what happened was, I said to Jer, and Michelle said to Jer, we met him and we said, let's do this after the New Year's. Let's get through the holidays.
Yeah.
Jer goes, okay. And so we do the meeting that night, and we did still have meetings. It was the meeting. And he said, we're disbanding the meetings, and
we're done.
Everybody's going to go home
because it's better for you to just go home and get on with your lives.
Holy shit.
And we were like, and everybody was like pissed. People were pissed. And it was, but he did say, if you need to stay longer, we're going to create a program for that, which was news to us because we were like, what the hell is he even talking about? And then all of a sudden, myself and one other dude, Mark, was like, you guys are going to make that program.
Yeah. And they had like a week to do it. But that's the way Jer did things. Like Jer was fearless.
Rip that Band-Aid off.
He had absolutely zero fear when it came to managing situations. He had absolute balls to do these things.
And you know what? It changed everything. And the people that went home did better.
Yes.
The people that needed to stay on, we had an actual program for them. We called it continuing education.
That's where the whole morph away from AA. That was the final piece where we changed from a support 12-step, even the vestiges of it, to education,
to actual education.
Yeah. To presenters. And that's where the freedom model matured, where we were like, and that was the day I also realized the book that we had that had still its roots in AA's book
Had to go.
had to go. And I started writing the very first freedom model. And that was scary to me because
Yeah, it
a-
was.
and then in the middle of writing that, I realized there's nothing to be scared of. I know more than anybody I know about addiction. Like I know more having walked through that cult. What it does is it became a part of my DNA. I
Mm,
lived through the experience of deconstructing the entire treatment model from state level lawsuits and how
yes.
they and AA, we sued AA at one point because they came after us and said some really awful things in print about me and Jared that were lies, slanderous stuff. So we went after them. And there, I went through that whole process. I was one of the first people ever to sue AA Incorporated, World Services Incorporated. And then, so all of that happened, and it was wonderful. It was horrible to go through.
Mm,
It was the most stressful, traumatic shit you can imagine. Your lives are destroyed by these people. They tried to destroy me, but I didn't have anything. So what was interesting was, in a way, I think fate created a scenario where I was penniless. We didn't make a single paycheck
That's
for that
right.
12 years. And so there was nothing to gain for everybody that came after us because there was no money, no assets. I mean, we had a building that we were renovating for 12 years, right? But we didn't own it. We
Yeah.
still were just barely making payments, right? And so it was just a wild time. But then all that was over with. Like the paradigm shift had happened. And then right after that, I said, we're going to make the first, and I said the words non-12 step. I
He did.
created the term non-12 step,
He
which is
did.
now a huge category that they've
And
bastardized.
the other thing you did, but he did this in the late 90s, was this internet thing, right?
Oh yeah.
He like created
Yes.
the first, he worked with somebody who had a loved one that had come through the retreat, and that person said, I can build you a website.
Yeah. What's a website? And
Right.
then I built the first one with Michelle, which was in Microsoft Publisher, and it was like a navy blue and
I
yellow
loved
lettering.
that website.
Oh, it's
I
such
loved it.
it's the very first one. I wonder if we could find it in the cache.
Probably in the
but-
archives.
But it literally was block lettering, a blue background. It looks terrible. And that started getting us people from different states and people getting into this intranet thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Like, what the heck is that?
Yeah. And then when
And-
I built the first official one, and I copied the wallpaper in one of the Victorian rooms, made a picture of the Victorian house.
It was a pretty website. He's got a good eye for art.
And then I created a reservations thing like a hotel, and we filled up.
Yes.
And then I got my first paycheck. And then from there, we built another retreat and then another retreat. And that was the next 20 years of just fine tuning.
And that
and
is when
writing.
that's why it made me think of it. He said, we're non-12 step.
Yeah.
This is a non-12 step program. And when nobody even knew what that meant.
Yep.
You know, and now, of course, everybody calls themselves non-12 step. And then before you know it, you're going to meetings when you go there, just saying.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they bastardized it.
Yeah.
It's meaningless now. But at the time, I created the first alternative to treatment in the world.
That's
And I fought in court and I won to be the first alternative. We're still
Yeah.
grandfathered in as not a treatment model because I don't treat
We
anybody.
don't.
You
We
know,
don't. We give you information.
Yeah.
My gosh, we could go on and on. And but I think you've got a good idea of how this all began. And we'll have to do another one of these.
Yeah. Well, let's I do want to say, I want to get to the end because I think there are people that don't know the end. And the end was Stephen Slate came back. He had gone back down to New York. He came back, and there were a lot of other people that influenced me. At
Yeah.
this point, Stanton Peele was involved at one point. We became friends, and Zach Rhodes eventually, and Monica Richardson.
Dr. Joy Brown.
Dr. Joy Brown was a huge advocate when nobody else was. And she
Yep.
did our first audio book. She's
Yes.
since passed on, which is sad to me. She was awesome because, and then there was a fella that I think I need to give credit to that acted like my dad. And it was a good friend's father, Len Eder.
Yes.
And he funded us in the
He
early years
did.
when there was nobody on the horizon that would help us in those beginning years. And he took it upon himself. He's since passed on as well. But it meant the world to me to have those people because I felt I know Michelle felt this way. I certainly know Jer felt this way because he was fighting the legal battles with Ryan, and they were dealing with a lot of that stuff. But when you have advocates in
Yeah.
those years, you never forget those people. I mean, they will be a part of your being because, boy, it's nice to have some friends when the world is against you
Yeah.
and the dogs are at your heels. And I'm not shitting you. It was at one point, me and Jer lived on the back porch with no heat, no nothing, because we
And it
gave
was snowing on them.
yeah, it was snowing. We had no windows. And if it was 0 out, we were out there in 0 degrees. And my aunt, my old 81-year-old aunt, would be out there with an electric blanket sleeping out there with us when she would visit.
She was such a tough woman.
Yeah. I
She
mean,
was remarkable.
it was, but we needed the rooms for the guests. So we gave them
Yeah.
the best rooms because we were constantly renovating. So there wasn't that much room. So we had to give them the good rooms. We'd be renovating, and we lived on that porch for 8 years.
We had a room when I was director. I was director for a couple years, or no, not even that long, like 6-8 months. I was director and an interim director of the retreat, and they had just built this room next to my office. My office was on that porch, but it had been renovated enough to where it wasn't freezing cold. But they had renovated this room, and it was the nicest room in the house, and the guests called it the Hilton.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Some of you
And
may
we were
remember
like,
that.
I would be like, can we not call it that? It's making the other guests feel like they're in crappy rooms, but it was really nice. room.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the amount of construction we did, we eventually
Oh my gosh,
took over
continuous.
a huge hotel up in Wells,
New York. Yeah.
And
it
then we built from the ground up. Me and Bob built the executive retreat. We've since gotten rid of all the retreats because we realized that you don't need them and you want to work with people in real time. And then we obviously, Stephen, me, and Michelle published the Freedom Model. So then we stopped that company and started a new company, the Freedom Model, where we realized we had the answer. We could teach it. We had beta tested it.
and we could reach so many more people.
That's right.
I
Worldwide.
mean, that's the goal. Our goal really is to work ourselves out of a job. We want people to know they can be free. And that's the irony when like the AA people and the naysayers talk online about us. They're like, you're just trying to sell a book, blah, blah. No, we were just trying to give away the book. We're trying to give away the information. Of course, we have services where we can work one-on-one with people and help them.
And that requires labor, which costs money.
Of course.
I mean, we have to make money.
Exactly. But our goal isn't to, I mean, it's so ironic. The treatment industry is goal is to create lifelong customers.
Yeah. To just rip you off and with fear.
Yeah.
It's
And
sad.
no, we want you to solve your problem and move on like we have. We're free. We don't do anything to maintain abstinence or recovery or it's a non-issue in our lives.
That's right.
And we want that for you because it's pretty goddamn awesome.
It
Just
is.
saying.
So listen, if you want to have the short version of this with some research so you can see what our programs are actually like, go to our masterclass.
Yes.
We're going to have one.
To plug that at the beginning. We were so excited to start this.
Yeah. And go to our masterclass. It's weekly. You just go to thefreedommodel.org, thefreedommodel.org. It's right here on the thing. Or hit the QR code if you're on a PC right here.
Yep.
You can see it on the screen. And then join. And it's an hour. It's recorded. So if you can't make the event time, the live time, you can watch it at your leisure. Also, we have coaching. We coach people all over the world.
Yes.
And we've done that for, I don't know, over a decade now. And we also have our complete addiction solution program. We call it CASP, C-A-S-P. And we're going to
fly in, you spend a few days with us and we take you through the entire curriculum. And then you'll work with us afterwards through the online program where you get to talk with us once a month for 2 hours. And also you'll have 3 additional private instruction sessions, which usually are about 90 minutes each. Private instruction coaching. We call them coaching. We've called it different things over the years, but you'll work one-on-one with one of us as you're applying what you're learning at home.
That's right. So, and we have coaches. So if you do coaching, we have several coaches now. Yeah, there's different options. You don't have to struggle.
No.
There's no, and it's very affordable. All our models are very affordable for what you're getting. It's a fraction of what you're going to end up spending at treatment to be told you're diseased for the rest of your
Right,
life
to
and
become a
screwed.
lifelong customer
Yeah.
there, right? No, it's unnecessary. You can have a great life. You can have the life you want, believe it or not. You really can.
So come to the masterclass. We'll explain everything to you.
All right. Thanks,
right.
everybody. Thanks
care.
for watching and listening. Are you struggling with a drug or alcohol problem, but you don't want to go to rehab or group meetings? Well, that's why we created the non-12-step Freedom Model Coaching Program in 2011. Through video conferencing on Zoom or Skype, you can work privately with a certified Freedom Model coach from your home or office on your schedule. And here's the best part. With the Freedom Model, you'll never be labeled an addict or an alcoholic, and we won't tell you to go to 12-step meetings or hamper your life with endless recovery rituals. Instead, you can learn exactly why addiction isn't a disease and how you can solve the problem for good and move on with your life. Do you want to be completely free from your addiction? Do you want to never have to attend meetings, rehabs, or addiction counseling ever again? And do you want to solve your problem from the comfort of home? Then call us at 888-424-2626 to talk with a Freedom Model coach today and experience the Freedom Model difference.